Good evening. The convention in news programmes is that we report what's happened, but these are unconventional, turbulent times, and frankly, we don't know what's going on. Something's up, though, with the euro. Rumours have swirled all day about the Greeks defaulting on their debts, big French banks in trouble, and the Germans manoeuvring towards some sort of operation which might save the currency, for now at least. Here's the best guess of our economics editor, Paul Mason. What is it?
There's rumours, Jeremy, because the French started the day by announcing that they were briefing journalists that they were going to make a big announcement about the future of Greece. And then they didn't, and there'll be something tomorrow. But there has been frantic private diplomacy all day between Greece, France, the USA, President Obama coming out saying in public, Europe, get your act together, you're pulling the rest of the economy down. And it's all been occasioned, really, because Greece needs 8 billion euros from the first bailout all those months ago, last May 2010. It needs 8 billion. And the Europeans and the IMF decided to say to them, unless you do X, Y, Z, you're not getting the 8 billion. This created a standoff that's been going on for the last couple of weeks, and it's coming to a head because we've only got 2 or 3 days to do that deal. Now, meanwhile, bank shares are tumbling, certain specific EU banks looking pretty precarious. Tomorrow, they've decided there'll be a teleconference between Merkel, Sarkozy and the Greek Prime Minister Papandreou, and boy would all us economics journalists like to be in that teleconference. It won't exactly be press 1 for default, press 2 for more austerity, but there are not many options beyond that. The French, German and Greek leaders will speak tomorrow, knowing they are running out of time.
The number you have reached has been disconnected.
Today, Germany's leader met Finland's leader to sort out a little local difficulty. The Finns are so worried Greece will default on its bailout loan, they've demanded separate collateral from the rest of Europe. Just one symptom of the general malaise of backtracking and indecision. To the wider world, Angela Merkel's message was, stop talking about a Greek default. She, of course, is worried about nothing else.
Wir haben dann natürlich immer wieder im Auge zu behalten, dass wir...
We have to always consider that everything we do is controlled, that we know the consequences, because otherwise we can very quickly have a situation in the Eurozone that we do not want, and which will have very difficult consequences for all of us.
Die wir alle nicht wollen und die für uns alle...
Today, in Greece, the taxi drivers went on strike and marched. Over the weekend, there have been riots. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, here pictured on a coffin, had to slap down an emergency €2 billion property tax because EU negotiators threatened to walk away from talks on the next round of the bailout. The Greek budget deficit is on track to be 9.5% of GDP, worse than expected and worse than demanded by the bailout deal because Greek GDP is shrinking. But Greece needs €8 billion this week, the latest tranche of bailout money, which is being withheld. Without it, it only has money to pay its bills until October. Some believe the euro won't be out of crisis until Greece is out of the euro.
I think it is inevitable that Greece will, in due course, be ejected or choose itself to leave. You can't have a more coherent, longer-term solution for the Eurozone until you've bitten that bullet and got the Greeks to leave.
In July, the idea of a Marshall Plan for Greece, modelled on US aid to Europe in 1948, made it as far as a draft EU declaration. The Brits got it removed. But now, senior German figures are behind the scenes urging Germany to do just that, rebuild the Greek economy with German money. But it's not flavour of the month.
The problem is that once you come up with a big master plan to solve the crisis once and for all, the other countries on the periphery, the Spains, the Italys or the Irelands, would have an incentive to just rely on French-German leadership and relax their own efforts to actually shape up.
As Greece slides, Italy is drawn into the zone of danger. Italy and Spain are relying on the European Central Bank, funded by Germany, to keep their own debts manageable. But when Italy had to raise a new loan today, it came at the highest ever interest rate in the euro era, 5.6%. Even at that price, China declared it would start buying Italian debt, though not, one suspects, out of solidarity with the Italian communists.
The euro got a decent lift out of this news that China was going to come in and buy Italian debt, or these suspicions that it will, but it was so short-lived. I think really the market is now at the point where it's looking beyond what can we do to help Italy, what can we do to help Greece, to really the next chapter in this whole huge sorry mess.
One idea gaining traction is for Brussels to create a new fund to move taxpayers' money from the north to the south, modelled on the EU structural fund, but for euro countries only. And here's the advantage.
Many of the schemes which people have talked about in financial markets seem to me to be non-starters, precisely because they're associated with the Germans taking on numbers in the trillions of additional debt. The kind of thing which I'm talking about is numbers in the low billions of annual transfers. So I'm talking about switching mindset to thinking we can find a solution that works within the kind of framework which we already have, just taking those things a little bit further. So, but that, of course, is a long-term commitment rather than a sticking plaster solution where you pretend the problem's all going to go away by the day after tomorrow.
But time is important. Tomorrow's big teleconference means we're moving beyond the summit stage to crunch time for Greece.
Paul, is there any evidence that European politicians are about to have a wholesale change of mind?
If they do, it will be a pretty big one, because they've kind of philosophically nailed their colours to the mast that the euro equals the EU equals the internal market. Mr. Van Rompuy this last week made the claim that without the euro, the internal market would fall apart in a crisis. Now, it's a pretty big leap from that to seeing one member of the euro leave, which is on the cards, Greece. But you've started to see in Germany opposition politicians talking about it. The FDP, the Liberal Party, talking about default. You've also started to see figures in the background of German politics basically saying, come on, we could do this Marshall Plan. We could draw a line under our post-war history, actually, by putting our hands in our pockets and saving Greece. So ultimately, it will come down to what the German people tell their elected leaders to do. And the crisis, I get a feeling from all this flurry of backroom activity, it's not far away.
Paul, thanks very much. Well, now here to chew this over from Berlin is Peter Altmaier, who's chief whip of Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, responsible for getting German MPs to vote for bailouts. Joining us is also the Greek journalist Matina Stevis, who's in Brussels, and here in the studio is Terry Smith, chief executive of currency brokers Talit Prebon. Mr. Altmaier, do you know what's going to happen tomorrow?
Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But we have a clear idea today what we have to do. The world economy is in a critical condition, and that means we have a certain responsibility to be very firm and very clear about what we intend to do. And our aim is clear. We want to preserve the euro. We want to avoid recession on a worldwide scale. And that means we want to keep Greece inside the euro, and we want to help Greece overcoming the crisis.
But of course, Finance Minister Philip Rösler said that if necessary, Greece should be allowed to just go bust.
The Chancellor made it clear that public talking about default is not a good idea. We have a Troika mission underway in Greece. We will see whether Greece will make the required efforts to achieve more stability culture in a sustainable way, and we are prepared to help Greece overcoming the problems. We still think the best solution would be to avoid default, but this is something, of course, that has to be discussed, not publicly, but with the minds clear to overcome the crisis.
Terry Smith, how do you think this is going to resolve itself?
I think Greece is going to leave the euro, and I think Greece is going to default. I don't know what's going to happen in the immediate term, but I think it's a detail. I think Greece is now running a deficit that is higher than was planned. And I think that will continue. I don't think there's anything practical that can be done to prevent that. The analogy I would give you is that Germany is basically like a well-to-do parent that's allowed a child out with a platinum credit card drawn on their account, and they will bankrupt themselves in the efforts to save Greece if they have the political will to do so.
Now, Matina Stevis, as a representative of this irresponsible child, why should the Germans keep on bailing out Greece?
Well, first of all, I'm not a representative of the Greek government, but the problem here is I think that we're fixating a little too much on Greece. I understand that, of course, it captures the imagination and our imaginations as journalists, but really what we're not talking about is the other countries, the other peripheral and not so peripheral countries like Italy that are in a lot of trouble. And what we're not talking about right now are the structural and design problems with our common currency. And what we're not talking about is why we're doing all this. And why we're doing all this is because across the continent, banks are undercapitalized. So it's banks that are going to be going bust first if Greece defaults.
Mr. Altmaier, do you think Greece is a special case?
Yes, Greece is certainly a special case insofar as the economic problems of Greece are much worse than in all the other countries concerned. There are problems with banks, certainly in other European countries as well, but there have mistakes have been made in Greece over a number of years, and this has to be repaired. It cannot be repaired in a short time, but what we need is a clear-cut commitment from the Greek government to change things profoundly, to organize a better administration, to privatize public enterprises. This is a very important gesture. We know it's not easy to do, but the monitoring troika from the EU will report on this, and this will be the basis for the further decisions on how to proceed with the rescue package for Greece.
Well, perhaps the leopard will change its spots, but if it were going to do so, would we not have seen some evidence by now?
Well, I'm of course not a representative of the government. I'm just the chief whip in Parliament, and my impression is that we are in a critical stage right now. There are so many rumors, so many diverging interests in this debate. And what we have to do as politicians is we have to be clear. And I come back to what the Greek colleague has said. The euro so far was a big success story. And we as politicians should be aware if one country would have to leave the euro, this could have devastating effects for the rest of the European Union, and therefore we should consider very carefully what we are doing as a next step.
Matina Stevis, what do you think the Greek government's going to do next?
Well, I mean, to be very honest with you, there's very little they can do. What they've been doing badly is adhering to those targets and implementing those reforms. And it's perfectly understandable that governments and taxpayers who actually pay up for these bailouts demand results. What needs to be said, however, is that, as has been mentioned, Greece has been mismanaged for so many years that many of the problems are deeply rooted within the country and within its economy. So reform is a little slower to come. And I would argue that evidence of the shock therapy Greece has been undergoing for the last year and a half is the recession the country is in. It's reaching 7.3% this quarter. Now, these are unprecedented figures for a Eurozone country. So, unfortunately, a big chunk of the Greek population are paying up. They are footing the bill for mismanagement that they did not cause. And they are, in a way, asking for help, support, solidarity so we can continue to enjoy all the benefits of the euro enjoyed across the Eurozone, in Germany as well as in Greece.
And in the meantime, Terry Smith, we've got the prospect of this particular euro crisis, a particular currency crisis, becoming a big banking crisis.
Absolutely. This is one of those situations where people often say, what's the answer? What's the solution? There is no painless answer here. If you support Greece, and I agree with the point that was made earlier, it will inevitably involve supporting all of the other countries in the periphery, which may not be as bad as Greece, but have similar deficit problems, and none of which are complying with their austerity programs to try and meet this. If you do that, it will cost so much that, in my view, it will bankrupt Germany, for which I think there is no political will. If you don't do it, then you're left with the problem that the banks in certain countries, most particularly France, have bought so much debt of these countries that they'll be bankrupted. So whichever way you jump here, I'm afraid it's going to be very bad.
So what's going to happen?
Greece will leave the euro and will default, and I don't think it will rest with Greece.
But,
I think that's such a superficial and easy solution there. I'm sorry, but it's the obvious thing to say, oh, Greece will default and leave the euro. But you have just made a quite an eloquent and intelligent argument about the interconnectedness of debt, economies, banks across the eurozone. So would it not be a concern for you what it would mean if Greece left the euro, setting a precedent for other countries perhaps in the future to leave the euro and in the near future as well? And what the ramifications of such a thing would be for the global economy, having one of the main currencies of the global economy completely destabilized?
I go back to what I said. I don't think that there's any...
Even worse, and even...
Hang on a second, Mr. Altmaier. Yes, go on.
There is no painless way out of this. Whichever way you go will cause pain. And the longer you lead it, the worse this will become. If I could go back to the child credit card analogy, the longer you leave them with the credit card, the worse it's going to be for you.
All right, Mr. Altmaier, you can have the final word.
Well, I'm sorry, but talking to my compatriots...
Hang on a second. Mr. Altmaier, you can have the final word. Go on.
I must join my Greek colleague. It would, in my eyes, be somehow irresponsible to say, well, the Greeks should leave the euro. No single problem could be solved in a better way if Greece would leave the eurozone. The amount of Greek debt in euro would double. When the Greek currency would be devaluated rapidly. We could not help as we can do it right now. And the second point is as soon as Greece would leave the Eurozone, there would be an enormous speculation about the next candidates for default. And this is something that we have to avoid by building firewalls across Europe. We have to develop the instruments, the tools in a toolbox that we need. And for the time being, we should dare as politicians to be firm and not to respond to speculation, but to do what we have announced and what we have promised over so many weeks and months.
OK, fine. Well, we look forward to seeing what happens tomorrow then. Thank you all very much.